Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Rita Afonso, and I'm part of the Executive Education team at Nova SBE. I'm going to be your host today. If you've been following our campaign Role to Play, you know that we bring you one webinar a day. We're very happy to have you live with us every day. But nevertheless, the webinars are recorded and they are available on our website rolletoplay.novasb.pt, so you can always watch them later and share them with your friends and family. On the technical side, please note that on the bottom of your screen you have a chat tool that you should use only for technical problems like sound or image. You also have a Q&A tool that we encourage you to use to pose questions to our guest speaker. And talking about guest speakers, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Roger Delves. He's a professor at Practice in Leadership. He's also Associate Dean at our partner business school, Ashridge, in the UK. And today he's going to share his insights with us about how to build leadership skills for an uncertain tomorrow. Welcome, Roger, and the stage is yours.
Thank you for joining us, wherever you are and whatever time it is for you. We're going to talk about building leadership skills for an uncertain tomorrow, despite the uncertain today that I've just managed to experience with this. This is where we were. It seems to me that when we look at where we were, leadership failures fall broadly into two different areas. They were either behavioural leadership failures, where leaders lacked emotional intelligence or they lacked the skills to lead people. Or they were ethical leadership failures. They were character fails, either on a small scale within an individual business or on a huge scale. When you look at huge scales, you look at things like Enron, you think about things like Kobe Steel, you think about things like the Libor bank scandal, you think about things like 2008, 2009 and the credit crunch and what happened to Goldman Sachs and Arthur Andersen and all of the people involved in that. And these were huge ethical failures. You think about Volkswagen and the emissions scandal. You think about, in the UK, the House of Commons and the scandal around expenses. You'll have your own favourites from wherever you are. But ethical failures were the common stuff of the first 20 years of this business millennium. And the first question I want to ask you is, how did you feel about where we were? If you go down to the bottom of the screen, you can put your hand up and tell me. First, put your hand up if you felt good about where we were in these first 20 years of this millennium. How did you feel about where we were? Did you feel good about it? Let's have a look at the participants. We haven't got too many people with their hands up. So we've got 150 attendees and we've got 11 or 12 hands going up for feeling good. Let's ask the other question. How many of you didn't feel too great about how leadership was, or how leadership felt to you as we went into this utterly unexpected pandemic that we're now in? Put your hand up if you didn't feel too good about it. Yeah, there's far more people saying, yeah, I didn't feel too good about it really. And of course, it's quite possible to feel okay about your own leadership or about the leadership you're experiencing at your own level in an organisation, and not feel okay about leadership more broadly in your organisation. Or if you look at leadership in the political sphere, you can be concerned about geopolitical leadership. You can be concerned about leadership around things like the environment, sustainability, war. but still feel that in your organisation, leadership is okay. Now, I'm not sure whether I don't think I'm pushing these slides on. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. So where are we now? If we go on to the next slide, where we are now is extraordinary and unexpected. It's an inflection point in history. When we look back over this century, it's entirely possible that Iraq, Afghanistan will be footnotes in history. It's entirely possible that the things I just talked about as huge failures, ethical failures of business, will be footnotes in history. But I don't think it's very possible that this year and this moment will be a footnote in history. This is an inflection point. But when you think about it, what's extraordinary about it is that less than 60 days ago, people were telling us everything's going to be all right. We have this under control. Things are going to be fine. But now, everybody is rightly worrying about now and today. But of course, from a business perspective, as we look forward, we look at after the lockdown is finished, after the pandemic is to some extent contained or to some extent managed, we come into a business environment which is changed utterly. And one of the challenges for us is we don't know anything about the landscape that we're going to be asked to lead in or to inhabit over the next year, 18 months, 3 years. One of the phrases that was being thrown around happily prior to the pandemic was this sense of a VUCA environment. And if you've not heard this phrase, I'm sure most of you have, a VUCA environment is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And people talked about antidotes to VUCA. The antidote being that instead of volatility, you can offer vision. Instead of uncertainty, you can offer understanding. Instead of complexity, you can offer clarity. And instead of ambiguity, you can offer agility. Now, the problem with that is, rather like the antidote for COVID, actually that doesn't work because we don't have any understanding about what's going to happen. Too much has changed. There are too many uncertainties. There is no clarity about what's going to happen next. There is so much going differently in so many different parts of the world that to try to settle on anything and say this is a certainty seems to be just quixotic. And therefore, trying to be agile is very difficult because we don't know what to be agile around. And in that kind of situation, trying to have vision is really very, very difficult. I was listening to a webinar yesterday, and I was listening to a recently retired senior police officer who reminded us of something which is a saying with a lot of value to it. She said, "Vision without action is a daydream. Action without vision is a nightmare." And at the moment, I think leaders are desperately trying to act, but there is no vision. Or where people are claiming to have vision, others are looking at them and saying, "You're daydreaming," because there is so much that is unknown and unknowable. So let's have another show of hands. Would you put your hands up if you're okay with where we are at the moment in terms of having a manageable future that you can look into and be comfortable with? Put your hands up if you're okay with where we are. Now, if I go down here and have a look at this, some 14, 15 people saying, yep, I'm kind of okay with where we are. Put your hands down And let's put your hands up if you're not okay, if you're uncomfortable with your own circumstances, with your organisation's circumstances, with the general position of your country or your company. If you're not comfortable, put your hands up. That's ticking up into the 60s and 70s. So a good number of you undecided, but a good number of you too saying, yeah, look, I'm not that comfortable. I'm really not that comfortable about the future. So let me get rid of that. What do we need for tomorrow? Let's click on a slide. There's a quote here from a man called Johan Roos, who is the Chief Academic Officer of Holt International Business School, who of course are the business school within which Ashridge operates as the school delivering executive education. And Johan asked me to work on a special interest group recently for EFMD, which a report has come out just before this pandemic actually reared up its head. We published a report in January. It was about, interestingly, the future of leadership development. And when Johan was addressing the SIG at the start of our work, he said, for the most part, today's business schools are busy teaching and researching 20th century management principles, and in effect, leading the parade towards yesterday. And those, I think, are prescient words, because as Nigel Payne, my co-facilitator in that research report, said towards the end of our time together, tomorrow is unknowable. It can't be undoable. It's not enough to throw people into the leadership bear pit and expect them to succeed. So nothing short of a radical rethink of the way we approach leadership development is needed. That was one of the conclusions we came to in the SIG before the pandemic. And again, it's even more true now than it was then. I think that when we get back into working in a new norm, we will realise that we have been subject to a second tsunami. The landscape in which we operate will be utterly changed. So I think to some extent at the moment, it isn't really possible to talk about the practice of leadership, because how can we talk about practice when we don't know what the landscape is going to look like? So what can we talk about? If we go on a slide, I think there are three concepts, three principles which we can build on to build better leaders for tomorrow. Now, a lot of people have been saying, look, we need to take the opportunity of this enforced pause to think about what do we need to change. And I think that one of the things about leadership that we need to think about is, what are the principles around leadership which are going to endure and which are going to be steadfast regardless of the environment in which leadership is going to need to be practiced? And when I think about that, and I think about the post-pandemic leader, and I think about what three things will that leader need to offer people for them to be prepared to trust that leader, to follow that leader, to believe in that leader. These three grounded academic concepts are the three that come to my mind. The concept of integrity, of authenticity, and of emotional intelligence. And I'm very briefly going to touch on each in turn. So if we go on a slide. And integrity. Here's a definition of integrity from Bruce Savolio, who I think is a brilliant academic writer. who says making decisions with integrity means using rules or guidelines in which we believe, not deciding based simply on situation or circumstance. And I think this is really important because I think decisions need to be congruent and not contingent in this unknowable tomorrow. Congruent with some kind of internalized sense of what is right. And that internalized sense of what is right is our sense of integrity. So, what is integrity? On the right-hand side of the screen, if we put up the next, it's a build-up slide, next one as well. Now, stop there. That is, okay, go on. Let's reveal who this is. This is Daniel Goleman from his book, Emotional Intelligence in 1998, defining what is integrity. And he says there's 3 steps to integrity. The first step is discerning right from wrong. And sometimes that's straightforward, and sometimes it's really, really difficult.
The second step is acting on what we discern. And sometimes that's the straightforward piece, and sometimes that's the really, really difficult piece. And finally, if we truly have integrity, then whatever it is that we are going to do, we must be prepared to say very plainly that we are doing what we are doing because we believe it has integrity. And if we don't believe that, and if we can't say that, then we shouldn't do it. And if we can use integrity as one of our 3 principles, the quality of leadership that we will need, we will find. If we move on a slide. Of course, Goleman is the father, or one of the fathers, of emotional intelligence. We knew before the pandemic that an awful lot of leadership failures were due to failures in emotional intelligence. But more so than ever, this sense of the self-aware leader who can manage themselves and who has social awareness and can build relationships. I think this will be more important than ever. And leaders who don't pay attention to emotional intelligence, who don't value it, and who don't see the value to them as a leader in being able to do things like create places of psychological safety, to be able to do things like inspire and motivate, to be able to say, I know myself and I can manage myself. I think leaders who cannot do those things are going to find leadership in this unknowable tomorrow extraordinarily difficult. And finally, if we move on a slide, authenticity. Authenticity is about integrity, and of course these concepts overlap. Authenticity is about building trust. It's about understanding that we must make decisions which are ethical. It's about aligning our values, the values of the organization with the values of the people in the team, the values of the organization with the values of the culture within which the organization works. Authenticity is about being able to have honest, true conversations, difficult conversations if need be. And that goes back again to creating a place of psychological safety where somebody will talk to you and listen to you at a values level, at a level where important things can be said and heard. Authenticity is about being supportive, about being challenging. If a leader can combine these 3 principles, the principles of authenticity, the principles of integrity, and the principles of emotional intelligence, then, in my view, whatever they are being asked to practice as a leader, whatever environment they find themselves in, they will find themselves well equipped for this unknowable tomorrow. Let's move on a slide. Sorry, that is Luther and Zandavolio's definition of authenticity. a behavior or course of action decided not by situational imperatives, but by reference to an examined template. So again, we're talking about the leader who, whatever is happening in the moment, whatever the unknowable tomorrow brings, has an examined template which guides them. And that template allows them to be true to themselves and allows them to behave in a way which is congruent with that inner truth. High-end other regarding values are at the heart of authenticity. This is probably my favorite definition. It's a Mishi and Guti quote from 2004. Leaders have too often not been driven by values which are important, and more importantly, other regarding. Too often leaders have become selfish, self-regarding. And one of the things that I really hope for the leaders of tomorrow is that they will be other regarding and selfless rather than selfish and self-regarding. Okay, let's move on. I hope there are some questions, some comments, some reactions about the journey that we're all going to be on, unknowable as it is. Let me apologize once more for the entire inability I appear to have to do anything remotely technological. Those of you on the call who know me know this to be true. And once more, I have proved it beyond all reasonable doubt. My apologies for the sticky start, and my thanks to whomever dug me out of it by putting the slides up.
Thank you, Roger. We have a question from our guest, Wanda Verissimo. Her question is the following. After this pandemic, do you think leaders will be able to change their communication and motivate their team? If yes, which should be the correct strategy? Or will they be worried about in recover business without paying attention to the team spirit and team worries?
I think that when I heard the question, the first thing that came into my mind was that quote about cometh the hour, cometh the man, or indeed woman. I think great leaders will emerge because we need great leaders, and I mean emerge at every level of organizations. I don't just mean at the top level of organizations. But again, I think that one of the things that we have to remember when we go back to whatever the new normal looks like, there are going to be all sorts of things that are going to appear to be urgent. But we must also remember that we should always prioritize the important over the urgent. Providing great leadership is important. Dealing with the inbox is urgent. And we need to remember that if we don't get the important stuff right, in the end, the urgent stuff won't matter, because it's the not doing the important stuff which will bring us down. And more than ever, we need to spend time doing the right things. And those right things are the important things first.
Very well. We have lots of questions here. Another one. What do you think is the biggest challenge and benefit for leaders during this time of remote work?
Maintain the quality of relationships that they had when they were working face to face with people. That's a very difficult thing to do. If you're used to sitting in an office and working face to face with people, and that's where you built your relationship, it's difficult to replicate that virtually. You have to work hard to do it. I think the biggest benefit that leaders have the opportunity to do is, and it's easy to throw this opportunity away, is take the time that we have now to reflect on perhaps what we've done over the last few years of our leadership careers that we're not very happy with. to reflect on what kind of leader we've become versus the kind of leader we might have wanted to be, to reflect on what kind of leadership will be needed when we return to work versus the kind of leadership that we've been offering. We very rarely get an opportunity for deep reflection. Again, I come back to the point about the overwhelming noise of the urgent. But where we are at the moment, we have time for reflection. It's up to us if we use that time wisely and well. But if we do, as leaders, we can learn a lot about ourselves, and we can prepare ourselves to go back into a changed environment and be the leader we really want to be.
Okay, thank you. One last question. Henrique Miranda would like to know how this event differs from previous catastrophes to bring different leaders from the ones we have now.
Pandemic is that it is exactly that. It is absolutely global. When we had the credit crunch back in 2008, 2009, many businesses were absolutely crippled by it. And many countries were extremely troubled by the credit crunch. But other businesses were completely untouched. And many countries in the world were relatively untouched by the credit crunch. That is not true now. There is not a country in the world untouched by this pandemic. And there will not be a country in the world whose business is not untouched by this pandemic. And therefore, it will not be the case, as it was with the credit crunch, where the unaffected countries could help the affected countries get back on their feet. Everybody is in the same position of slowly and carefully trying to recreate a new normal, not knowing how long it will take, not knowing how successful it will be. So everybody is learning to do things differently at the same time. It's a little bit like when people suffer something like a stroke and they have to learn how to do things that they could do before. They have to learn those things anew, and sometimes in a different way. And it's something similar to that. But the big difference is everybody, every country in the world is affected by this. And I cannot remember a single event of which that was true. It wasn't even true of the world wars, but it is true of this pandemic.
Okay, Roger, many thanks for being with us today and for sharing your insights on this subject. I would also like to thank all the participants that joined us for today's webinar, and feel free to join us for tomorrow's webinar, and good afternoon for you all.
Yes, goodbye, and thank you very much. I really appreciate people joining. I hope there's been some value in it for you. And I've certainly, other than the first 5 minutes, I've thoroughly enjoyed being with you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Roger.